What's up, Canes fans? Hope you had a great weekend. It is the Canes Insight Daily Podcast powered by Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. Portal is continuing to move. We had the instant reaction pod with defensive tackle Simeon Barrow committing to the Canes. You can see that on YouTube or Spotify, iTunes, whatever you want to listen to for your podcast. We have that in the can. But the defensive back room continues to be in need of an upgrade, some more talent there. D'Angelo Pons, who we talked about, ended up going to Indiana following his old coach from James Madison. But there is another name who has emerged before Pons committed anywhere, who we first identified on CanesInsight.com that you need to know about, and that is King Mack of Penn State. We'll break down his game and the Miami interest in bringing him as a transfer. Also, basketball news, and not the good kind. Norchad Omier, one of the most beloved Canes, a key part of their Elite Eight and Final Four teams, has committed to Baylor. So that dream is done. He is gone, and we'll reflect on that and what that means for the Canes moving forward. First, want to talk about people that aren't going anywhere. They're not jumping any portal. Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. If you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, you could be entitled to significant compensation. 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733. Take back control of your life with Anajar and Levine. All right, Pete, come in. Bringing in Peter Ariz here. We got some bad news to talk about with Omier. We'll save that to the end, but wanted to start with some potentially interesting news. Let's put it that way. With King Mack, safety from Penn State, entering the transfer portal after one season. King Mack, this is somebody who was a top 100 recruit, very highly respected, especially by 247. He's a player that we've liked for a long time at Canes Insight. We were on Friday, before anything was out there about King Mack and Miami interest, we reported that Miami does have interest. 3 days later, now on Monday, it is coming out in a more public fashion, but those of you who are signed up to the CanesInsight.com forums, the free forums, got that info on Friday. Miami has interest. And this is someone that Miami, maybe their grade on him has risen since he was a junior, rising senior in high school. His evaluation has been ongoing, and Miami really, really likes the potential from King Mack out of St. Thomas. And the key with him is his measurables. Not his size. He's 5'10", 190, but the speed. 10.64 in the 100, 21.43 in the 200, state champion 46.25 in the 400 meters. He has a lot of interception production. Put on his huddle film. He was returning kicks for touchdowns. This is someone that I identified before his senior season as someone I really liked. Him, Conrad Hussey, who's now at FSU, D'Angelo Pons, who we talked about, the target from Indiana, or from James Madison, who just committed to Indiana. So this is someone I've liked for a while and really has risen in Miami's eyes recently based on his play. He didn't play a ton of defense at Penn State, was mostly special teams, but was headed for a big role here coming up and in the future. And if you're saying, why are we talking so much about a special teamer for Penn State as a true freshman? This guy just visited Alabama as his first portal visit. So that tells you a little bit about how he's viewed. This is a 3-year player, Pete, which I know we're going to talk about. So the fact that a team like Alabama wanted him and had brought him in for a visit as a multi-year player, and the Miami's after him as a multi-year player, I think speaks to his upside.
Well, and remember the last safety from Aquinas that Miami, they wanted him at the end of the process. Jordan Battle, a few years back, ends up going on to Alabama, having a great career there, now playing in the NFL as a third-round pick. So you don't want history to repeat itself twice. You better believe that if Bama's on him, they've also gotten word through the pipeline there as well that he's a legit guy, right? So obviously we know the type of talent that Aquinas produces every year. But to me, and you just said it, D, this is different than a lot of these other transfers that Miami's been picking up. Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, Sam Brown, Simeon Barrow. These have all been great pickups, but we know that this is an all-in year for Miami. You're going to have these guys for 1 year. There's a couple of these guys who could be here, like a Jalen Alderman has a couple years of eligibility. But this is a guy in King Mack who, listen, if he would have come to Miami last year, probably wouldn't have played much either because of Miami's situation as safety last year. Could have probably used him at times, but he now would be able to come to Miami with obviously a clean slate in front of him, a real opportunity to get on the field early. And you mentioned the track numbers. This is a guy who had big production in high school, and we're seeing the huddle clips here, but The production was there. You match that with the speed, the measurables. It's tough to miss on guys like that.
Yeah, I'm a big measurable believer. Again, as we showed that old post that I made back before these guys played their senior year, it wasn't rocket science scouting. King Mack ran outrageous times and was productive at a big school with ball production and instincts, had enough size, not the biggest guy. Conrad Hussey, very good times, not as good as King Mack, but very good times, athletic two-way player, good film, big school. D'Angelo Ponce, who again, Miami fans got really excited about, who ended up going to Indiana, great times, big school, Chaminade, and was productive. So to me, I think Miami needs to focus a little bit more on at the defensive back position, where we struggled to recruit, where Coach Adai, I don't think, did the best job of bringing in talent at the level that we need at Miami. And quite frankly, a lot of defensive back coaches have struggled with that at Miami in recent history. A focus on measurables coming out of high school will serve us well. So we're not talking to King Mack and D'Angelo Ponce after they sign somewhere else. We're getting them out of high school because of their verified speed and the ability to pair that speed with the film. The film may not be perfect. There may be things that you want to clean up, but if you can front end the speed with track times, with camp performance, with verified measurables, you can figure out the rest later. I think that's where Miami really needs to focus defensive back recruiting going forward, is getting guys that have the speed before you bring them in.
Definitely. And again, what you watch it here. These are clips against, some of the best teams in the country, Heritage, Dillard, tons of talent there always. So you have a good idea of what you're going to get with this guy if he does end up coming to Miami.
Yeah, again, St. Thomas is not a sleeper. We all knew about him. I think sometimes people can get focused on certain nuances of the film, and that's why there's people know a lot more about football than the fans sitting here behind a mic. But I think there needs to be some sort of humility when it comes to the measurables, and just say, look, we may not like certain things on film, but the measurables are the measurables. And if we bring in enough guys with these measurables that have enough instincts that it's not just like a pure track guy, you can work on some of the flaws and improve the player. Matt Rule, who's now in Nebraska, he had that similar approach at Baylor, and you saw Baylor producing a lot of NFL talent. Tyquan Thornton, who went to the second round to the New England Patriots, a Booker T kid that was really more of a track kid in high school, had enough production that you said, okay, he can play receiver. But then when he got to college, he really took off because of that track speed and became a second round pick. That's the kind of thing Matt Rule did. Toledo's another school when it comes to defensive backs. They really put a big emphasis on those 100-meter times. Quinyon Mitchell from Williston, Florida, ended up going to Toledo, was a 10-9 kid in high school, developed into a top first-round pick. So that, to me, is something that Miami just needs to do a better job of. You look at our roster now, there's not a lot of track speed in the defensive backfield, and I think that's an area that's probably the weakness of the team right now. And getting guys like this, whether they have multiple years of eligibility, through the portal or straight out of high school, I think needs to be a focus going forward.
Yeah, and we mentioned it the other day when we talked about D'Angelo Ponce, who obviously ended up going to Indiana, but that was one of the reasons he was an intriguing target there for Miami, because of that track speed. So we definitely agree there. But I don't know, D. The Baylor, I don't want to hear too much more of Baylor. You mentioned Matt Rule at Baylor. I'm not in a great mood today with this Omier news.
Yeah, great transition, Pete. So, we're going to have to go to caneswear.com or Caneswear to get some new Canes basketball jerseys. We've got some new players that you can have their jersey when you get your Canes basketball gear at caneswear.com. Unfortunately, the number 15 no longer will be on the shelves. Omier, I'm losing my voice talking about it, getting emotional. About Omier leaving. Obviously, Pete, I know you watched his whole career. We were excited about him coming in when he came from Arkansas State, and he really not only met expectations with that transition, but he really exceeded them.
No, and this was a guy who right away when he entered the portal a couple years ago at Arkansas State, he was a conference player of the year there, guy who played his high school ball in Miami, obviously from Nicaragua, and had a lot of ties with people down here in Miami. And really, he was exactly what the Canes needed at that time, right? He brought that energy, the assertiveness on the offensive, side of the ball. Obviously, his rebounding was tenacious, and for the way that roster was constructed in his first year at Miami, obviously being a big part of that Final Four run. Remember him getting hurt in the ACC tournament game against Duke, and it looked like a really bad ankle injury, and he bounced back the next week there against Drake, and from that game on, you knew he was going to be all right the rest of the way. So a guy who always, played with a ton of heart out there, had to log a lot of extra minutes and really carry the load inside, right? Which you expect now at Baylor. He's going to have the opportunity to play a little bit more as a true four, which if he wants to play at the next level, he needs to continue to see that development. I think if he stayed at Miami, he would have had an opportunity to do that this year as well. Obviously, Lynn Kidd coming in from Virginia Tech, but I don't know if he's going to be seeing many Nicaraguan flags in Waco, because he had that support down here. So it just, again, part of this is like, man, it just seemed like the perfect fit. But this is the day and age of the transfer portal. Miami's been very fortunate the last couple of years, right? In all sports, really, basketball and football mainly, but they've had a lot of success in the portal. This one, to me, has to be the toughest loss that the program has endured, though.
No question. I mean, I think when you think of the Larrañaga era, I look at eras of within that, within his tenure, there's different eras defined by different players. So you had the Shane Larkin era. That team, you think of that team, there were a lot of players, a lot of depth, a lot of size, but I think of Shane Larkin. Then you think of Angel Rodriguez and Sheldon Mack kind of defining that team. This last run, you've had some great perimeter players, Moore, Wong, Pack is still here, obviously, McGusty. But to me, Omier has been the face of this whole run from the Elite Eight to the Final Four. And then last year, he defined the team with his energy. It made the lineup very unique because he was such a unique player. He really, to me, was the guy. And so now that he moves on, I think Miami really becomes a whole different program. They got to find a new face, a new mentality. They got to match that energy with some new players, still rounding out the rotation with transfers. But I'm curious to see what this program is going to be defined by going forward as far as their identity, because certainly when you played Miami the last 3 years, Omier was probably the most unique player that you had to prepare for on that team.
Yeah, and I have his stats up here. The stats are one thing, but when you really watch him play, and a lot of times just how he would control the game down low he's listed as 6'7", but he's probably closer to 6'6", right? So his sheer strength down there, obviously long arms, his second jump, beating people to the ball, his instincts, all of those things, it's going to be very tough to replace. And then the matchup problem that he posed, you see obviously 17-10 this year. It was a tough year for the Canes, a lot of injuries, but 13-10 the year before that, a block a game, a steal and a half a game, a steal game last year, right? And then 55% from the field. This year, adding that top of the key three to his game, right? So he was such a difficult guard. Some of these traditional big men having to guard him on the perimeter, the ability to take them off the dribble. And then if you tried to stick someone smaller on him, he was going to go to work down there. And he was too quick for a lot of these big guys down at the post, right? So from that standpoint, he was very difficult to game plan for, as you mentioned, D. And it's going to be very tough to replace. You're not going to find one guy to replace him, right? The look of this team and the feel of this team is going to be very, very different than we've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah, Lynn Kidd, a totally different player, doesn't have the same kind of defensive intensity or just physicality, probably more skilled in the post, but not that kind of, tip of the spear tone setter that Omier was. Is Brandon Johnson that guy? Probably not. So you wonder, Matt Cleveland, we had him last year. I don't see him in that role. It's going to be interesting to see who is the tone setter from an energy standpoint on this team. You also lose a Bensley Joseph, who was that defensively at the guard position. So who's going to be setting that defensive tone, that physical tone that you really need to be a competitor in the ACC? Because I don't know if that's on the roster right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Dylan Mitchell, who we mentioned last week, visited, former 5-star, went to Texas, we were watching some of his clips the other day, D, and he does seem like an energy guy for sure. Tons of bounce. I mean, he gets up and down. He's a rim runner, right? 6'8", 6'9", average 8 rebounds a game, right? So, I mean, to me, he's not the same player as Omier, but he does bring a bit of physicality and real athleticism that I think at times other than Omier has been lacking at times is just sheer athleticism. Wooga was a jumper and a jump shooter, right? But he wasn't a really physical athlete, right? So to me, a guy like Dylan Mitchell would be a great addition to this team. And Brandon Johnson, you mentioned him. He does, if you look at his highlights, he does have the ability to score in the low post, but it's more of a finesse post game, right? And that's not to say those aren't valuable buckets, but Omier was kind of like, as we talk about on the football side, right? That power run game and that physical element that can wear you down, right? And when things wouldn't be going great offensively, you could throw it down to him and he could go get a bucket, go get to the free throw line. Was a great free throw shooter as well. So again, as you can hear in my voice, I loved him as a player, and I think it's gonna be tough to replace him. But I have trust in this staff, and that's one thing about Coach O. He's done a great job retooling. Right, when they do have those down years, finds a way to kind of reconstruct the roster and pick things up in a big way. So still excited about what this program has ahead of it. They did a great job recruiting last year. I've had some really nice pickups in the portal here, and still at least 2 or 3 more to go, I'd imagine. Yeah,
I think what's interesting to me is we had the good fortune of having our best hustle guy be our best player, second best player. He was statistically probably our best player, certainly this year. And I really thought he was our best player last year. I know Wong was ACC player of the year, but he was also our hustle guy. So some teams, they have a lot of talented offensive guys, and then their hustle, energy, tone setting guy is more of a glue guy, more of like a guy off the bench or a fifth starter, someone more along those lines. So with these remaining spots, do you prioritize getting what you call like more of a hustle guy, somebody who's not going to be relied upon to score as much, but that's what they bring? That's their best skill. That might be something you see because you've already added a lot of scoring. You're bringing in Jaleel Bethea, top 5 player in the country. Really the whole, Austin Schwartz, also a scorer. The guys you brought in, really their best skill, I would say for all 3 of them, is scoring, whether it's shooting or in Lynn Kidd's case, scoring in the low post. So, and finishing at the basket. So when you bring in so much offense, maybe you bring in a guy that's only role is to be not the full player that Omier was, but the hustle player that Omier was.
Definitely. Yeah. And remember a guy like Eric Swope back in the day who made it as a tight end in the NFL, right? And listen, Norchad, we still love you. I think you could still be a heck of an NFL tight end as well one day, if it ever came to it, right? So look, best of luck to Norchad. Led us to a Final Four, right? Wish it would have worked out this past season, and I think that probably had to play into it, right? The end of the season there was really not good, and a lot of these guys left. Nigel Pack ends up staying, Cleveland ends up staying, but it's going to be interesting to see how this roster continues to retool here. Remember, Keyshawn George came out of nowhere last year when they added him to the roster, right? I think it was now in this May period here. So it would not surprise me to see a couple names emerge here that haven't been on the radar end up popping out of nowhere and being legit contributors to this team next season.
Yeah, we can't forget, we're bringing in a top 5 player in the nation, which Miami's never had a player of this caliber coming in. I would not put Lonnie Walker in that category. I wouldn't put Darius Rice in that category, as far as this guy is going to be expected to be, in his mind, a top 5 pick in the next year's draft. So you got to account for that as well.
Darius Rice was before his era, man. If he was coming out today, he would be a top lottery pick for sure, man, as a stretch 4.
Well, and a great cane. I mean, I'm not trying to disparage anybody. Those guys were great. Those guys were great canes, great basketball players. I'm saying that this is another level, it seems, coming out. So I mentioned who's going to be the face of this era. Maybe it's the Jaleel Bethea era, at least. It might be a short era, one season, but you build around him. And I think You have scoring, you have guys that can shoot, you have guys that can score down low. You need some defense and some intensity, and that might be where you see from these next few additions.
Definitely, and we'll have Luke Chaney on some point this week. Obviously, does a great job there at Inside the U, and on top of the roster movement and all that. So we'll see if he's got any extra scoop for us this week. He was all over the Dylan Mitchell thing, and hopefully get an update on that one, because I think that one right there would be probably, I think, to this point, the biggest addition out of the portal guys. And I'm a big fan of the other guys that picked up as well, but that's just my opinion.
Yep. We need talent. We need some athleticism. He just lost some with Omier. So a lot to add. Again, all the best things that fit in like a glove at Baylor. That really fits him. I think, obviously, I'm not supporting his decision to leave Miami, but if he's going to go somewhere else, I think that's a program that fits in with his defensive mentality. So best of luck to him, and we will keep you up to date on all the latest as Miami tries to pick up the pieces, put it together on the basketball team, and continue to work the portal on the football team. So
go Canes.
Go Canes.